So, hello and welcome to the first listeners to this online panel from the initiative From Sea to the Cities with the title Corridors of Solidarity, Concrete Corridors of Solidarity. For technical reasons, we wait for another 2 minutes until all interested people really join. And then we start with a short introduction and present the speakers and to explain how we want to continue in the next 1.5 hours. So let's wait for another minute or 1.5 minutes and then we start. So I still wait for a hint from our technical department if we can start the session.
Yes, feel free to start.
Okay, super. Thanks a lot. So welcome again to this third online panel from the Sea to the City initiative with the title Concrete Corridors of Solidarity. There were already 2 panels, one in July with the title Solidarity Cities of Europe. How can we work together on a progressive migration policy? And a second one, end of September, with the title Which Way Forward in Europe, EU Funding for a Solidary Migration Policy. And today now we have the third session, Creating Corridors of Solidarity. We have in moment 5, perhaps later 6 guests, which I briefly want to present. It is Maurice Stierl from WatchTheMed alarm phone. It is Fiona Kendall from Mediterranean Hope. It is Rikko Voorberg from the network Migrants. It is Eleonora De Mayo from the municipality of Naples, and Rikko Voorberg from the Dutch initiative Let's Bring Them Here. Yeah, I think we have a very nice composition of speakers between, let's say, movement and institutional approach to discuss this idea of the corridors of solidarity as a practice and also as a vision in the same time. My name is Hagen Kopp. I'm from No One is Illegal network and also part of the From the Sea to the City network. Towards Corridors of Solidarity was already the subtitle of a statement from June 2018. And I just want to quote the last sentences from this statement. We all build and spread novel structures of disobedience and solidarity. From sea rescue to solidarity cities, from access to housing, to medical care and fair working conditions, from legal counseling to protection against deportation. We prefigure and enact our vision of a society in which we want to live. And we ask the civil society to join this process, to create corridors, spaces, and projects of solidarity, crisscrossing and subverting all internal and external borders of Europe. We call for safe passage, safe harbors, and safe transit to a dignified life at the places of arrival. We are all humans and we want an inclusive and open society with the right to mobility and equal rights for all. These have been the last sentences of a statement an outcome of a transnational meeting we organized in Palermo in May 2018. It was invited by the mayor of Palermo, Leoluca Orlando. He was also a speaker in the first panel, here mentioned panel, in July. And it was co-organized by WatchTheMed Alarm Phone. The right to mobility, you might know this, is crucial, the main demand of the Carta of Palermo, which was already published in 2015. So we started with a Palermo Carta platform process, we call it like this, with this meeting in summer 2018. It was, as you remember, a few weeks before Salvini came into power as Italian interior minister, but also as examples when Seebrücke in Germany or Mediterranea in Italy appeared as new actors from sea to the cities. So 2019, this Palermo Carta process, hold further meetings in Barcelona, in Naples, and in Bologna. And the idea was in June 2020 to meet again in Palermo in a bigger conference. You know, it could not happen because of COVID-19, but we hope to do it next year. Anyway, the process is ongoing against the background of an escalated border regime, cooperation at sea between cities developed in the last years, in the last 2 years. So the mentioned demands, safe passages, safe harbors, safe transit to a dignified life at the places of arrival remain our common goals. We want to discuss about experiences, about limits, about challenges and perspectives in this direction. And we start now with the first round of inputs from our guests, from our speakers. We plan for a second round with some more questions to deepen the discussion. And finally, we plan for a third round where we want to include questions from the auditorium. So everybody is invited to use the chat and to make comments or to raise questions. So we will start with Maurice Stierl from the WatchTheMed Alarm Phone, which was founded already in 2014. So one of the earlier sea rescue actors. I mentioned that WatchTheMed Alarm Phone co-organized the first Palermo meeting in 2018. And yeah, Maurice, let us know about your efforts for a stronger collaboration at the sea level. I think this is mainly your task.
Thank you, Hagen, and hi to everyone. I'm happy to be part of this important discussion, and I will just jump right in because we don't have that much time. As you know, the situation in the Mediterranean Sea continues to be absolutely devastating. 5 years after the long summer of migration and 7 years after the devastating shipwrecks off the coast of Lampedusa in 2013. So just over the course of this month alone, we have seen several catastrophes at sea, and I fear that October will become the deadliest month this year. Last week, there were at least 2 shipwrecks off the coast of Libya, costing probably over 26 lives. Last Saturday, at least 140 people died off the coast of Senegal when trying to reach the Canary Islands. A day later in the same region, probably over 40 people died. Again, a day later, this Monday, 12 lives were lost. Earlier this month, we also saw shipwrecks off the coast of Tunisia and Algeria. And some of these catastrophes didn't even make it into any of the major mainstream media outlets. So instead of trying to prevent this mass dying from happening by working towards the creation of some sort of safe and legal migration routes and corridors, or that the EU institutions and member states really propose a more restrictive policies that of course exacerbate the need for these forms of precarious and dangerous migration. And instead of trying to rescue every boat in distress in the quickest and safest possible ways and to guarantee disembarkation at a place of safety in Europe, EU authorities do what they can to deter them. So with regards to the Central Mediterranean Sea, many of the so-called European Maritime Rescue Coordination Centers, so short MRCCs or RCCs, have turned into de facto non-assistance and pushback centers in close collaboration with EU actors such as Frontex, WatchTheMed, as well as authorities of third states, such as those in Libya. For example, the Rescue Coordination Center of Malta, RCC Malta, and the Armed Forces of Malta have sabotaged migrant boats. They have abandoned the distress at sea. They've orchestrated pushbacks to Libya, also through secretive fleets, and also from within the Maltese search and rescue zone. On top of that, and as is experienced by migrants in distress, by merchant vessels, by the civil fleet, by alarm phone and others, RCC Malta as an emergency center can mostly not be reached via the emergency phone line. Then we have MRCC Rome, the Italian authorities, and also the Italian Coast Guards, which have largely withdrawn from search and rescue engagement and have routinely rejected responsibilities for rescuing boats in distress and for assigning ports of safety. In addition, Malta and Italy, as well as others, of course, have really tried to not only withdraw from the Mediterranean Sea, but also to criminalize those who actually want to rescue. So the civil fleet, but also fishermen who have engaged in rescues, as well as people on the move themselves. So when these so-called rescue coordination centers become that dysfunctional and not only fail to live up to their duties to rescue, but instead directly become involved in systematic violations of human rights, we, I think, as activists, as human rights defenders, as civil society organizations, need to think creatively about how we should counter this sort of violence. So this is why some members of the civil fleet, so the NGOs that are and activist groups who engage in rescues in the Central Mediterranean, have recently decided to work towards something that we call the Civil MRCC, so the Civil Maritime Rescue Coordination Center. For us, we see the Civil MRCC as a response to this state neglect and violence. So we are basically saying you European member states and institutions have withdrawn from search and rescue. This is why we had to send our own boats. This is why we had to send our own planes. And this is why we had to create our own emergency hotlines. And now we also have to coordinate rescues and disembarkations because European actors reject their responsibilities and duties to do so, and are even becoming implicated in dramatic rights violations, right? So the Civil MRCC is both a practice and a vision. On a practical level, it means improving the already existing cooperation between civil search and rescue actors. This is nothing new. Since 2014, innumerable lives were rescued due to the assets of the civil fleet, including those that monitor from the sky, as well as the alarm phone hotline, which has assisted over 400 boats in the Central Mediterranean. And besides rescuing, these different actors have also documented grave human rights violations, uncovered shipwrecks that EU authorities try to hide from the public, and prevented a range of unlawful pushbacks. So what we now propose when we speak of the Civil MRCC is an intensification of this collaboration so that we can guarantee the best possible support of people in distress at sea. So we will extend our cooperation also in other ways, in terms of counter-monitoring EU border forces and those of North African states. And we will also try to do what we can to prevent illegal pushback operations while they are going on by state actors, but also by commercial actors. And if we fail to do so, we plan to also again engage in strategic litigation after the fact. So besides this practical dimension, the Civil MRCC is driven by a vision. It is driven by the vision that Hagen outlined, another Europe, an open and welcoming Europe. So we see our initiative as another building block for our movement, which calls for solidarity from the sea to the cities and infrastructures for the freedom of movement. So the civil MSCC is meant to become is an integral part of the Palermo Charter process that seeks to create these corridors from the Mediterranean Sea to safe harbors, to welcoming cities, not only at the places of landing, but throughout Europe. And this is why I think these discussions and these collaborations are so crucial, and I will just leave it at that and pass on to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Maurice, for these first impressions from the sea collaboration. And I think we will come back again to the civil MSCC a little bit later as well. The next speaker will be Fiona Kendall from Mediterranean Hope. I learned again that your project started as well in early 2014, and you have projects in Lampedusa and in Sicily, but you mainly have a project which is called Humanitarian Corridors. And I think we are very curious to hear about, to learn about your experiences and your project in more details.
Thank you very much, Hagen, and thank you very much for the invitation to participate in this discussion and to be part of this important From the Sea to the City project. We're really pleased to support efforts to connect issues which are often disconnected by policymakers. That seems to us to be an important thing to do. So yes, I'm Fiona Kendall, representing the Mediterranean Hope project, which was set up by the Federation of Protestant Churches in Italy back in late 2013, directly in response to the surge in people crossing the Mediterranean Sea at that time. And the mission then was quite simple, just to send a couple of people to Lampedusa to help with welcoming people and supporting that increasingly overwhelmed community. But over the years, our project has grown arms and legs. And although we still have a team based on Lampedusa, as you say, we now have a reception centre on Sicily. We're directly involved in supporting exploited workers in Calabria. We're engaged in advocacy and communication work in Rome. And today I wanted to say something about our flagship project, which is the Humanitarian Corridors programme, which we developed and are implementing from Lebanon to Italy. I think it was very early in the lifetime of the project that people here understood the connection between safe passage and reducing deaths at sea. So really at a very early stage, wanted to find a mechanism for bringing people safely and legally to Italy, and that gave birth to Humanitarian Corridors. Our federation, which is a federation of Protestant churches, worked on the model in tandem with the Comunità di Sant'Egidio, a Roman Catholic community, so it's an ecumenical project, but crucially, it's a partnership between government and civil society. The legal instrument on which the whole concept is based is the Community Visa Code, specifically its Article 25, which gives European member states discretion to grant visas with limited territorial validity to people for humanitarian reasons. And the first protocol that we entered into with the relevant ministries in the Italian government provided for 1,000 of these humanitarian visas to be made available to participants over the course of 2 years from 2015 to 2017. And under the first protocol, participants would be drawn from Morocco and from Lebanon. The eligibility criteria would be a prima facie international protection case or proven vulnerability, having regard to age, health, or personal circumstances. And a second protocol was signed in 2017. Negotiations are just about to conclude for a third one, and we fully anticipate that this one will have wider geographical reach. Legacy corridors have sprung up from Ethiopia and Jordan and into France, Belgium, and Andorra. The model is flexible, it's adaptable to different legal and cultural contexts, but always at the heart is this partnership between government and civil society. Government provides the visas, and up until now, civil society is basically implementing all of the other aspects of the programme. Humanitarian corridors aren't a quick fix. They don't just provide evacuation, although that is, of course, something that's really important and something that is achieved. It's about long-term integration of participants. So aside from accommodation, either with families or in independent housing, there's a structured programme of pre-departure orientation, significant support on arrival, ongoing help with language tuition, education, finding work, and of course, support in applying for international protection. We know that the model works, and we are absolutely convinced that it could be scaled up across Europe, and that it could involve a variety of member states and cities welcoming participants. And we've developed a formal proposal for European humanitarian corridors, which we presented to the European Parliament in December last year. The original focus of the proposal was those who are trapped in Libya. But after discussions with UNHCR, it became clear to us that this is a model which could help migrants across the whole of the central Mediterranean route. They all need to benefit from wide-scale implementation of the model. So we have a simple but ambitious call, which is to bring 50,000 people out of North Africa into Europe within the space of 2 years. And the Italian government is supportive of the proposal, but it won't move it forward unless there is buy-in from other member states who are willing to share the load. And so it seems to us that this might be where there's a role for cities across Europe to get involved. First of all, in harnessing local activists and NGOs in a common endeavour to welcome and receive participants. Secondly, to lobby national governments to grant visas and bring people to Europe. And third, to create a clamour which reaches the ears of the policymakers in Europe and helps with funding. So we are looking for partners with whom we can develop and expand the programme. But setting up corridors takes time, it takes effort, it takes money, a huge amount of all of these things. But the more people that are involved, the more feasible it becomes. So in short, in Italy here, we have a model that we know works. We've got know-how, we're willing to share it, we want to scale it up. And I guess the challenge to everyone who's listening is who'd like to get on board. Thanks.
So thank you, Fiona, for this first round input. And I think we will have a lot of questions on this interesting project. But we continue first now with Filippo from Migrants.
Ciao, everybody. Ciao.
And I think Migrants is one of the older networks, already founded in 2002, exactly. Mainly to struggle against the camps all over Europe. And I know that is a strong network based in many European and also African countries. So you are a researcher on solitary cities, and of course we are very interested how you frame this, or how you can refer to this question of the from the sea to the city approach, and about the corridors, how much it is discussed in Migrants.
Thank you, Hagen, and thank you, everybody. I take the floor as member of the Migrants network, and as a researcher on solidarity cities. As a Migrants, we have worked since 2002 as a Euro-African, as you say, network, by producing critical analysis of European policies on migration, starting from the border regime, the militarization of the borders, and the dissemination of the camp in the European Union and outside and behind its border, until the externalization process evolved, externalization of controls, and now externalization of the asylum. As a researcher, I have been working since 2006 on the notion of city of refuge, sanctuary cities, shelter cities, solidarity cities, with the idea that to confront the identitary logic and tackling the policy of Fortress Europe, the real and the concrete site of hospitality, reception, cohabitation, and solidarity is the local one. So I have a pars destruens with Migrants and a pars construens with as a researcher. In general, with Migreurope, we fight against the criminalization of solidarity, and we are very critical when the humanitarian system is mobilized alongside the control system by institution in order to manage migration globally and putting the humanitarian logic against the fundamental human rights. In particular, regarding the institutional notion of humanitarian corridors, I mean institutional, so I personally think that we need to consider that the notion of vulnerability is as a category of selection, which could be instrumentalized by the logic of the externalization of asylum. When the OFPRA, the French Office of Protection of Refugees, go to Niger to select the eligible migrants to become asylum seeker, I'm not fine with it, because the rest, I mean, the not selected ones, will try to live anyways and in worse condition. So until we can use the instruments of humanitarian corridors when we have no other choice, as in Libya now, I think we must mobilize a whole other series of legal access route, work, study, family, and much more. On the other side, we can imagine a real corridor of solidarity only by organically linking different actors of solidarity in different space of solidarity. On the one hand, creating a network of solidarity city in Europe, it makes possible to design roads of solidarity, as in Colau's idea of 2015, from borders to metropoli, from Lesbos and Lampedusa to Paris and Barcelona, for example. Creating concrete space of reception while confronting the problem of national rights, which does oppose secondary movements. Here we must work to strengthen the right to city to be city of solidarity. For example, and I talked about it with our friend Charles Eller yesterday, asking cities not to use their local police against migrants, as happened in Secretary City in US, for example. On the other hand, the real challenge today is to find a way to build and defend roads of solidarity as also toward Europe and not only inside of Europe. I mean, to create a chain between solidarity actors, city, but also towns, local setting or moving settings as NGO in Mediterranean Sea, in order to protect people fundamental rights, the right to live, the right to move, and the right to stay. In this sense, I always like to remind people of the 2014 Lampedusa Charter, that today I still feel represent an important starting point and a fair-reaching vision. So I don't know if it's interesting for us to mention this Lampedusa Charter, because it was a very important starting point a few days ago. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Filippo, for this first statement. The next speaker is Eleonora from Naples. And I mentioned that we had one meeting from the Palermo Charter process in Naples. It was in June 2019. But I myself remember that Naples was one of the first safe harbor cities. And I remember very much, mainly, on a very famous video clip, which was produced from a civil society in Naples in January 2019 in reaction, in response to the blockade of Sea-Watch 3 with several passengers to open the city and to give a sign that Naples is open to welcome all the rescued people. So happy to hear from you what is the situation in Naples.
Thank you, Hagen, and thank you sincerely for the invitation and for the opportunity to take part to this debate this afternoon. We are for some moments or from some hours outside from the mono speech, mono discussion about pandemic. So this is a good thing for me. And we have the occasion to connect ourselves to all the previous political work that we did in the years in the 2018 and 2019. You were speaking about refugee city and Naples and Palermo, but also Siracusa and other small cities of the south of Italy that was really convinced in opposition to the interior minister at Salvini in when he stopped the Sea Watch and the Mediterranean and all the ONG that was in the Mediterranean Sea in that period. Anyway, I think that I want to share with you some consideration, and I think you know, and you are seeing that all over Italy in this period, in these days, there are a lot of struggles for the social effects of the pandemic on the Italian society. And I was thinking that our debate of today is really linked to this situation in Italy in these days, just because you know, I think you have seen on the newspaper or magazines that all these struggles, or a lot of these struggles, are crossed by, of course, social movements, of course, progressive association, but also with the risk of extreme right, neo-fascism, etc. I think that we have to connect, we have to try to connect all our debate and all our struggles on immigration policy, European immigration policies, about the European the European borders, etc., to this debate on struggles in Italy and on social effects of pandemic, because it's the only way we have put everything together. It's the only way we have to unbank neo-fascism and in general extreme right that in this moment try to be stronger and stronger. And you know, when extreme right is stronger and stronger in the squares, it would become a big problem, enormous problem for us, and also for our defense of rights for migration and for rights for migrants. In general, yes, you say Naples was one of the first city that declared the as a refugee city, and to open its port, its harbor to the boats, to the ONG boats, and to the migrants in general. But I think that now we have to do something like a jump. We have to imagine to improve this sort of democratic infrastructure between cities. In the last debate, I was really worried because, you know, the era of neo-municipalism, the period of neo-municipalism is like ending in Europe in this period. So we had Barcelona, Cadiz, Naples, but also Palermo, local government changes. And we have to write something that is able to remain also for the local government that will come in the future. Something that, I don't know, I was imagining, and I spoke also with the other deputy mayor that is involved in policy, in immigration and welfare. Something like resolutions together that are written together by Palermo, Naples, and Barcelona, etc., that in a certain sense write something that is similar, and it prove that we start this work together, and we want to go on also when local government changes. So that's the reason why I'm sure that we must put all the things that we are saying together and try to connect all our experience and start again from 2019. So from Naples, we are here. The mayor is really happy that we started this debate and say hello to you and say, okay, it's really important that we start again to speak about humanitarian corridor. We had a lot of families from Syria that arrived with the humanitarian corridor in 2018 and 2019. Then we stopped for serious reasons that I can't explain you in this call, but we want to start again also with the humanitarian corridor. But I'm sure that we have to improve our network, and I'm sure that we have to write local resolution that prove also with the European Union that there is a network of cities that is able to overcome also the changes of local government.
Thank you, Eleonora, for this input from municipality level. And now we go to the last speaker in the first round, to Rikko from Netherlands. I think it's only a few weeks ago that you started an ambitious project just to rent a plane and to go to Lesbos and, let's say, to make pressure for your main demand of relocation and evacuation from these camps. It was a few weeks after Moria burned down. So we are also very curious to hear about your project, about your first evaluation.
Thank you, Hagen, and thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit about what we have done and to be part of this impressive group of speakers on this topic. Indeed, it was on the 5th of October that we flew of the citizens of the Netherlands, almost 1,000 people who had been sponsoring and many more supporting it, sent a plane, an empty plane to Lesbos Mytilene airport to say, hey, our actions are always directed at the Dutch government, because we as civilians of the Dutch government say, hey, you on behalf of us have to do the things that are right. So we intended to send this, or we sent this plane and said to the Dutch government, hey, you got to fill it. It's your job to start relocation and evacuation. We are ready for it. So we are sending this plane. We ask you to fill it. We will not wait for an answer. We'll just go ahead. So that's when the plane flew. But that was not our first action. We've been working for relocation for years now. It was in 2016 that our first action, Dutch civilian action started, because, well, we all saw what happened at the borders, how hard it had become in the different camps, and that as civilians, it's at some time you start to realize that you don't want to just sign petitions, although it's very important, that you just don't want to only send help, although it's very important. You realize that these people need a fair procedure in humane circumstances. And we had seen that the last attempt to European-wide solidarity action by the member states was the relocations decisions of 2015-2016. They had promised to relocate 160,000 people from Italy and Greece to undo the terrible effects that the Dublin procedures had, so where people will be captured by, almost in Italy and Greece. Our prime minister even would say, well, it's too bad for Greece or Italy. They just have geographically bad luck. That was something the civilians in the Netherlands just didn't want to accept. So first we drove to the government in the Netherlands with 250 cars and say, hey, we're ready. You've promised to relocate 8,000 people to the Netherlands. I don't know, we don't know why you're not doing it, but we are ready to do it. So here are our cars, here are our number plates. Please write them down because we are ready to drive now. That sparked a huge debate on relocation and on the Dutch responsibility. 2 court cases followed. And we went in December 2018 to Athens with a bus, just to say, like, we cannot just sit and wait until something happens. We have to move ahead and to put this thing on the agenda. We are always in touch with the NGOs in the Netherlands, with other movements, say, hey, is there any other way to put this thing on the agenda? If there's not, maybe now it's our task. We are not that good in lobby. There are lots of organizations who are really good at doing lobbies. But the problem of being a lobbyist organizations, it's really hard to be more daring in a way to risk it. So we decided to be an organization on the side, a civilians movement that could risk, failure, so to speak. We could just go and see what happens. So after the fire in Moria, one of the medical NGOs, Boat Refugee Foundation, we are good friends with, they said 2 things are needed: emergency care right now and an airlifting people from Lesbos. And then we sat together as a team and said, well, maybe it's our task again to do something. So can we rent a plane? So I started making phone calls, and yeah, it's possible to rent a plane. So we, very basic, opened up a bank account number and said, if you people donate, we will just send a plane. And the more chairs are sponsored, the bigger the plane is. In 1.5 a week, 189 seats, 189 seats were sponsored. So we knew we had to fly. And on the 5th of October, this plane took off, an empty plane, just our team aboard, and lots of empty seats waiting for to be filled by the Dutch government. Well, they got a bit anxious in Greece. So half an hour before we should land on Lesbos Island, the Greek government ordered us to land in Athens. They revoked the permission in midair. And we had to land in Athens, had a big discussion, a bit of a standoff with the police. And then the plane had to leave Greek airspace. And now so we went to Lesbos, and we had a big demonstration in the Netherlands after live streaming from Lesbos, what had to be done. It was all over the news in the Netherlands. And for the first time in, I think, 4 weeks or 5 weeks after the fire in Moria, all the discussion was about relocation again. Instead of sending, well, tents and sleeping bags and food, which is necessary, but not the request from refugees itself. And the last thing is, people were always asking, like, hey, aren't you offering false hope to people you cannot relocate? We've been talking a lot with people in the camps, and they say, well, false hope, is that what Europe has been given us? They said they would respect human rights, and they're clearly not doing it. And the signal that we receive from all the barbed wire, from the police security, from the camps, that European people don't want us on this continent. And it's hard for us to believe that there are actually people that say, hey, we live together on this planet, you're welcome here. So thank you for this important visual image that we are in this together. So it was actual hope on humanity. Well, we're not done yet. But we are thinking now, hey, what's the next step? Can it be European? Can it be what's to do now? How can we connect? Because it's clear that all these organizations in these weeks are trying to connect together to see how we can change the course of the deteriorating circumstances in the camps, and the policies that are just getting even harder for the people on the move in the different camps in Europe.
Thank you. And in the second round, with some questions, trying to deepen the discussion, we do it in another order. So we continue, Rikko, with you. About, you mentioned it, this was the question to create false hopes, for hopes which will not fulfilled for the refugees on one hand. You mentioned this, the question of continuity, what does it mean in your project? And if you remember what the speakers before you have said, you have on one hand a Mediterranean hope, obviously more effectively lobbying, but also let's say we will come back on it later, but perhaps you can also start a discussion about the criteria, what would be the negotiations and with the state. And at the same time, the questions, if we can join forces here with the different actors from municipalities, from churches, imagine and explain with a mayor and a cardinal on board. Can we imagine to try another time and to improve to strengthen the pressure?
Yeah, for sure. By seeing that how much pressure the Greek government felt from just a plane with 5 or 10 people on board, it clearly puts the situation on the agenda. So yeah, if there would be people joining, I mean, in this effort, we could clearly imagine planes just trying to make a way. And it's not about the planes, but it's about moving forward. It's about showing in a visual, physical way that we will not wait until governments and politicians have made their mind. We just have to move forward until, well, that's the thing. And we have to make clear that in this moment, politicians are standing in the way of civil society wanting to take responsibility for what's happening on the islands. And that's a thing that needs to be stressed over and over again. There's people ready to help, to open up houses, to open up hearts, to spend money on righting the wrongs that are happening in the camps. So yeah, I would love to team up on our different strengths. The lobby parties. I mean, that's what we do. We thought, even if this one fails, even if the plane never takes off, then still there has been a visual image of a movement of citizens that is willing to do this, that is willing to go that far and even further. And that can be used by lobbying parties. So I'm not sure if we should all become one organization, but to work on the backside of it and say, hey, if you make this move, then we can make that move, and we can team up and connect to each other and create a movement. So yes, if you've got 2 mayors and a cardinal, we'll find a way to fly again, one way or another.
Okay, thank you. Then we go back to Eleonora in Naples. You use the word jump. Eleonora, you are here? Yes. You use the word jump. We need another level. You mentioned a kind of resolution. It means probably to improve the collaboration between the cities and to make pressure. You also mentioned because of elections might change the mayor, but how nevertheless to guarantee a continuity in the cities. And you perhaps heard now the question, can we use these planes where also cities, mayors might be active? And you might remember to a discussion of buses of hope, planes of hope, ferries of hope. You know, these in reference to the March of Hope, to the buses of hope in 2015, to say we need new projects in which we do practice relocation from below, and think about the idea. We discussed it the first time in 2019 in Naples, that a ship is coming to disembark in Naples, and from the northern cities, we will send buses to pick up people and to bring them into the cities where they are welcomed. So you can you imagine to, let's say, to build up structures in this direction, or to say, okay, we need these planes of hope or buses of hope as a new level, or is your jump more on a, let's say, on a communication level?
No, not only about on communication level. I'm sure that we have to find a new political instrument, but also new legal instrument from a municipality level, because I think that during this year we built up this really interesting network between the cities. It was something completely new, because a lot of different local governments start to speak all together about some different topics. I mean, migration, but also public debt, also I don't know, right to the city, and etc. But we haven't maybe we hadn't time to practice something like confederation, let pass me this word, but a sort of confederation of local resolution and local law. I think that this kind of infrastructure, that is really something that I'm thinking in this period together with the other deputy mayor, is like a legal instrument that we can oppose to the European level, something that is from the city against the European level, that is really impersonal and is difficult to change from the cities, from the municipal level, I think. So I'm really worried about the change of the government, of course, because we are ending our experience. Barcelona will end this experience, and it's different from the first Barcelona government, this second one, and Palermo the same. There will not be another De Luca Orlando. So we have to thinking something that is that leaves something in concrete, that that we can use when we will not be in the institution in the future, that we can use to claim for network of cities and for refugees cities, also in next years, I mean. So I think something really concrete, not only communicational level, not only work on imaginary, because I think we worked a lot on imaginary in the cities. I'm not speaking about, of course, the ONG, the different ONGs, associations, Alarm Phone. They have done during these years an incredible work, concrete work. But I'm speaking about the municipal level that was really, really strong on imaginary, but we need the time to work on something more concrete.
Thank you. Then the second round to Filippo. You mentioned your solidarity research, and I felt that you also, let's say, see the national or the supranational level in opposite to the city level, or the city as the hope for a change, for a political change. I would like to understand if you also inside Migro also try to translate it into practices. Last year there was a transporter summer camp not far from Paris in Nantes, mainly discussion about infrastructures for freedom of movement and equal rights. And I would like to understand if you, Filippo, are you still with me? I guess Filippo had a technical problem, and at least it's not here. So then we hope he will come again later. We will jump to Fiona again. So you mentioned your concrete corridors as a partnership between government and civil society. And you heard my question to Filippo. I mentioned that we feel in the movements, I would say, that we cannot really rely to the national governments anymore. We have to think for own structures. And I would like to understand better how it worked in your lobbying work and what kind of contradictions you saw, you evaluated, because I remember that Minniti, the former Italian minister, welcomed very much a corridor plan from your organization, while he made the negotiations, the memorandum with Libya to pull back people. Huh? And the question, if it is not a risk, also if you have to follow some criteria of vulnerability and so on. And Filippo mentioned that is the danger of getting into a selection modus. How you handle these contradictions, how you try to deal with these ambivalences, I would say.
Okay, so there's a number of points that you've raised there. I mean, I think first dealing with the vulnerability point, which was mentioned by Filippo as well, and the risk of instrumentalization. I mean, I wholly agree. As an organization, we certainly don't think that vulnerability should be the only or main criteria for safe passage for people into Europe. But nonetheless, there is a group who are vulnerable, and for that to be one of the criteria, I think is important. And the situation in France, as I understand it, for humanitarian corridors is that there must be vulnerability in addition to something else, whereas in Italy it's only one of the possible criteria. But on the more general question of ambivalence and paradox, you're right. The situation in Italy is very complicated. I mean, there is this whole history between Italy and Libya, which dates back decades. And you don't even need to go just back to Miniti, but even prior to that, to 2008, when Berlusconi and Gaddafi entered into the Treaty on Friendship, Peace and Cooperation. And in there is explicit reference to Libya being involved in Italian migration policy. There are tensions here. That is the fundamental position of Italians, which I've seen for myself, which is that this seems to me to be an extraordinarily welcoming society. And yet at the same time, there is this sense of Italians being abandoned and being left to shoulder a burden. And so in a sense, I think the fact that there is this paradox within government reflects the paradox within Italian society. And it's perhaps not so strange that on the one hand, you've got policy of externalization, and on the other, a policy of welcome in operation at the same time. So we live with this. And I think the positive thing to take from that is that, notwithstanding the complicated political and societal context, humanitarian corridors survive and are welcomed, not just by the Miniti government, but also by the present administration and by many people in Italian society. So I guess the positive point I would take from this is that if they can function here, there is a good prospect of them functioning in other member states as well.
Filippo, you are back now?
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I had a problem with my laptop,
Yes.
so I'm with my phone.
I don't know if you heard my question, my second question, but you can
No.
Yeah,
Sorry.
it was again and you hear now what Fiona said, and I think perhaps you can jump into this, because you already criticized, let's say, the criteria of vulnerability as a mean of selection. You also were much more in favor on the city levels and on the state level. But on the other hand, you heard that moving in the paradoxons, or let's say to use the tensions and to try to extend from vulnerability perhaps to other aspects, and to have a real corridor. What do you think about these considerations, or to move between a practice and a vision?
We is a good question for Migrant, but I can answer it first for Migrant, and then as a researcher concerning the tools that we can imagine and how we can work. But for Migrant, that we speak about freedom of movement as an ideal political objective to reach something to reach. So it's in our idea. That's why I was mentioning the Lampedusa Charter, because the meaning was the same. So try to give to everybody the possibility to move. So produce a different way to move. So I think the humanitarian corridor must exist, because we need humanitarian corridors for particular situation. But we cannot, the risk for me, and that's what I was criticizing, not the work of Mediterranean Hope, but I was criticizing the approach of the institutional way to think the migration as a vulnerability, and try to say, okay, we have just one possibility is to be vulnerable and go and use the humanitarian channel. No, we need to find other way to allow to the people to move. This is very important. I think it is most important to point. That's why I think we need to explore different ways and different situations. So how we can build it, we can work it. I just can mention, as Migrant, we have a network, and I think as a network, what we can do now, and with what we try to do now, operating in Europe and outside of Europe, in Maghreb and in the CDO in particular, with our organization, is try to connect solidarity actors and solidarity realities, and try to find a way to create a relation and an ideal channel, a connection. This I think is important to point. And another stuff I would like to mention, thinking and not answering, but concerning what Eleonora was saying before, I'm thinking to Sao Paulo, and Sao Paulo tried to fix some politics on reception or hospitality or solidarity, doing the protocols, trying to fix and normalize some policies, local policies, and is something to respond to the fact that if the major or the government change, the situation change, and the city are not. I mean, I was working on Venice. Venice during for 20 years was an example of solidarity city, and now with the government today is completely on the opposite side. So another tool, another point we are trying to discuss, and more in the research point of view, is the notion of firewall. And I quote François Crépeau, and he says, separation between immigration enforcement activities and the public service provision. Try to apply this logic, this concept, not only to the solidarity city, but also to the solidarity roads. And the idea how we can find a way to protect people in movement and protect people into the city. I've probably not answered to your question, Hagen, more or less. No, but yeah, I think coming back to the question about corridors, I think we need to think. I mean, if my final objective is a freedom of movement, I think that the corridor, humanitarian corridors, as one of the solution, but we need to demultiply the possibilities to move. This is the point, and how to do it is we try to enforce the concept of freedom, concept of solidarity, and so on.
Okay, we come now to Maurice again, my question to you is mainly about, let's say, the solidarity approach, because we discussed now a lot about, the question of cities, of institutional level, movement level, lobbying, and the question of relocations. But I think we should not forget who are the main actors. It's the migrants and the refugees who push us also with all our projects. We said one time we follow the tenacity of the migration movement. So I think we should also bring this back into the discussion if we talk about these different criteria and other things. So I would like to understand what is your discussion about this, solidarity approach.
Yeah, thanks, Hagen. And in some ways, it's also connected to what Filippo just said about, rethinking movement and human movement across borders, right? So not to sort of narrow it down too much in advance. And I think the question of solidarity and to think about who the real protagonist of migration is really crucial, because I think although we are quite a diverse network, we should not maybe streamline our sort of political narratives too much to allow for diversity and to have different actors engaged. I still think that we have to sometimes remind ourselves who the real protagonists really are of migration, right? And it's of course those on the move. And so I think we do always have to emphasize the agency they actually have, also in order to avoid sort of reproducing racialized and even colonial imaginaries of these others from the global south. And I think it's not only about like a political discourse, but I think it really filters into or plays into our very practices and actions, right? Because I think when we see these others as merely passive victims to be saved, often by Europeans, white Europeans, who would then sort of bring them here, it really erases the reality of migration, which I think is crucial in order to understand how people actually show this tenacity that you mentioned to cross the sea, right? It's not sort of those at sea, although the right wants to portray it as such, right, who sort of brings them here, right, as a sort of taxi service. It's actually the tenacity of the people themselves who organize the crossings. And for me, this is just such a crucial factor also in terms of what then sort of our quote unquote role is here, right? It's not necessarily to bring another 100, 200 people here, because I think overall this is, you know, rather insignificant. It's not enough. What we need is to emphasize that we support and reinforce already existing corridors of solidarity, right? And these corridors are not often not created by us, or in the most of the cases are not created by us, but those who actually move disobediently and who make these corridors, right? So I think when those who cross the sea reach European shores, they quite often already have a very concrete idea where they want to end up, right? And so they just continue their journeys, their precarious journeys. And of course, they are implicated in this sort of Dublin displacement regime as well, but still they move on, you know, against the sort of fingerprinting regime in order to reunite with families, with friends, to join communities, diasporas, and, you know, also, of course, linguistic and, you know, cultural communities and so on. So I think what we need to do is to think about our work as the facilitation of a sort of relocation from below, right? And I think we also mentioned this term. It's like relocation from below means that people themselves relocate, you know, because they know where, quite often they know exactly where they want to end up. And so instead of this sort of idea to shape migratory realities, I think we also have to take a step back sometimes and allow ourselves to be shaped by them, right? So the collective idea to create these infrastructures, I think, is based on this very acknowledgement that those on the move do move, you know, irrespective of sort of what we do. And so I think instead of just emphasizing this idea of like, we just bring them into our space, quote unquote, I think it's better overall politically to really emphasize that what we can do is to strengthen these sort of migratory corridors along the way that are actually created by those on the move. Okay, I'll leave it at that.
Thanks a lot for these remarks. And perhaps we can start now, let's say, a final round. We are in the last 23 minutes. Perhaps we start again with Rikko. And I would like to ask you also perhaps to go through the questions in the chat to see if you can pick up also something from these comments or from these questions. But Rikko, perhaps concretely what Maurice said, did you also took into consideration these questions of relocation concerning migration movement? It means in the relocation, the usual relocation processes.
For sure.
We know it from Germany that people who were relocated by Italy and from Italy and Malta, they are now confronted with deportations. They are not safe. They have to go through an asylum process, and if it's negative, they are under deportation threat again. So it's not a solution. The other question is, if we do it by ourselves in any way from Greece, we are confronted with the Dublin rule, and the question of how can people really decide where they want to live and to get these residence permission finally in the place of arrival they want to be. I don't know if perhaps you can also.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes.
Well, I do absolutely agree with Maurice. For the first, our reaction was, of course, to the let's bring them here, to the closure of the borders. After Hungary closed its borders, all of the other borders closed, and that was the first injustice we saw happening. That people just wanted to cross borders, and that it was so unfair that you could just travel with your passport through all those borders, and that there was no possibility for people who had actually the need of crossing borders. And that's where we started this movement. Hey, these are our borders, so we have to find a way to cross them if it's illegal for them to cross. So it's, of course, it's a cry of the heart to say, hey, let's bring them here, or we gaan ze halen in Dutch. For this is not fair. These are not the circumstances. This is not the responsibility of Greece. It's also the responsibility of all the member states of Europe. And I would absolutely agree that it is for refugees themselves and people on the move themselves to choose their path. and to find their way into Europe. And you could see also when the borders were open, there was much more openness to welcoming people, at least in Dutch society, when people would just come in from different places, and there were emergency shelters. There would come people from everywhere just to help. So it's righting of wrong, and I think this movement of ours and connecting to the last European-wide solidarity mechanism that was put in place, which is the relocation decisions to right the wrongs of the Dublin regulations, so we are trying to say as civilians to counter the statement that there is no support base for people in society, and that the only thing we can do is sign petitions. Is no. We have to take responsibility. We have to gain or to stress the fact that relocation can happen and has happened and is happening, and is quite a clear emergency solution for the moment, until we can be more fair. And I really understand what Maurice is saying. It's the thing we say when we have discussions with people who do humanitarian aid. We say, hey, the actual request of refugees in Moria, but also other camps, is not to get food, not to get shelter. Their request is freedom, and that's what we want to, in a way, to say to our Dutch government. Hey, these people need the freedom, and we are able to give them a fair procedure. If that procedure turns out in effect in a negative result for them, that they are not granted the refugee status, that's the next step. But first, these people need fair procedures, because then they are treated as a human again. So I think that's the main thing we can do. And I love the humanitarian corridor idea, but the fact is that they are often for people who already have granted a status. And we should share also in Europe the responsibility for the procedure. So not only the people with a status can travel through into Europe, but we should, as Europe, as member states, take responsibility for the procedure itself. So to counter the saying of our Prime Minister that Greece and Italy just have geographically bad luck.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps we can go to Fiona. Again, on one hand, you might have seen the question, how many people had access to the humanitarian corridors in the last 5 years? I think this is a very practical question only. But on the other hand, I think perhaps you can also make some more remarks about this question of solidarity approach of migrants as main actors in reference to your projects, or how you, let's say, try to bridge the practice you are doing with a vision that, of course, is a different story.
Yeah. Okay, so first of all, in relation to the question from the floor, which was about the number of people that have had access to corridors in the last 5 years, insofar as the Italian corridors are concerned, it is about 2,000. Certainly 2,000 visas were granted in every 2-year block. There have only been 2 protocols within the last 5 years. And as I mentioned, there are some legacy corridors in other places. I don't know precisely what the figures are there. I'm guessing in total, we're talking maybe 3,500. The numbers are very small. And that for us is one of the massive difficulties, because if you look at the need in Lebanon alone, UNHCR registered over 930,000 people as refugees at the end of last year. And we're talking about bringing 1,000 people every 2 years. So that's a real problem. Just to go back to something Rikko said, certainly in our model, nobody who accesses the programme already has refugee status. And that's an important difference from a resettlement programme. So they're coming with a humanitarian visa, and they need to apply for international protection once they get here. It's certainly the case that most of them will, on the face of it, be able to satisfy those criteria, but they are not coming as already settled refugees. More generally, in relation to your question about agency and solidarity, I think this is a really vexed question for us. Our programme is young, and so in terms of engaging the beneficiaries as they're known, or the participants, which is the word I prefer to use, themselves, we're really only embarking on that properly now, I would say, through a system of monitoring and evaluation and systematic feedback. And I think for the first couple of years, there was anecdotal information being received. There obviously was a constant discussion and conversation with the people participating in the programme, but it wasn't systematic. And now we are getting better at collecting that data, at understanding what those needs are and how we can improve the programme and make it better adapted for the people who, after all, are most concerned by it.
Okay, thank you. Filippo, you also perhaps have some more comments, and there is a question in the chat, how to empower municipalities to participate to the network Solidarity Cities in a pragmatic, concrete way. I think I would also ask you this. I think this question is perhaps also coming in reference to Marseille, where another city has a green mayor now, hopefully so open as she announced in her election struggles. So perhaps you can also give some more remarks on the, let's say, the practical level of Solidarity Cities.
No, I think it's important to work on different levels, let's say. In the internal level, for Marseille, for example, now what is important to underline is that the civil society was working in Marseille before. And now, so what is important to do for me, from my point of view, in Marseille now is to do the link and try to find a way to collaborate between civil society and the new municipality. So this is something that is important. Try to find a way to reinforce the local solidarity, and try to demultiply the connection and national and international networks. As I can mention. I mean, in Middle Europe network, one of the members in Belgium, CNCD, organized a campaign trying to engage the local municipality in to be a hospitality city. So we can work as a civil society, we can work as a municipality, and try to work on these different levels. In what is hard, but it's most interesting for me, is try to create a network outside of Europe. So in Europe is important to this internal mobility, but we can work also to think this mobility, so this solidarity galaxy, solidarity constellation outside of Europe. I'm thinking on the Maghreb cities. I think of Gao, the mayor of Gao, take position talking about the fact that he would like to exchange with the city of the European cities. So try to open the scape and create solidarity between cities in Europe and city outside of Europe. I think is important. And just coming back to Maurice, just to put my just a line. I think it's very important to mention that the European and national institution are completely, in the state of denial of the agency, the idea that the migrants have of the movement, on the right of move. I give you an example. When the French think that the reception as a CAO, Center of Accueil and orientation, you see the paradox. the people are oriented, they know where they are going, they want to go, but the state create another narratives about movement. So I think it's important on one side to take the time to understand the wish and what they want. I mean, the idea of mobility from the let's say, migrant point of view, and on the other side, and I come back to your question, is important to work to that, like say, in a pedagogical way to the community and the local community in order to work on participation and responsibility and solidarity, trying to explain that we can share, we can stay together, we can cohabitate in the same space. I think it's very important to work on this side, because if not, we have a city who are completely against, let's say, the example of Calais is very important to mention. So we can have also the ville hostile, not non solidaire. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Maurice, the chance for a last comment. I think a few people already use the chat to answer on concrete questions. Others can do as well, because we have to come to an end very soon. But yes, contested spaces is our term. We all the time try to describe the situation in the Mediterranean Sea, but also on the land. And if you look back to the last 20 years or the last 10 years, what happened and what dynamics were created by the main agent, by the migration movement. So yeah, Maurice, you have any final comments to the session?
Sure. I mean, I think there was one question about whether we involve MEPs, and of course this is very concrete, and but I may just want to touch upon this, because the idea of the civil MRCC is definitely carried from a grassroots level up, right? So it's carried by those who actually and actively engage at sea. And, you know, we are of course always happy to gain any support on any sort of political level, but, you know, we are very much aware of who the driving forces and the principal actors are in this process, right? And that's not on the EU level. And so I think this also goes back to the very central questions that we have raised today. Is why do we actually engage on a grassroots and a city level, right? Because I think on a national, nation state and supra-state level, so on the level of the EU, there are very few political possibilities, right? It seems that there is so little that is actually changing, but we see that actually these the EU institutions and the member states work really hand in hand to create this sort of deterrence regime that we see everywhere, right? So if you think about political possibilities, I think we really have to focus on the grassroots level, on what we do already, and then build it upward in a way, right? And I think maybe just to return to some of the comments that were said earlier about the question of like the narrative that we use. Maybe just to say again that I think there is, of course, the possibility to use also humanitarian narratives, right? I was not too critical of that, but I think we always have to use it in a sort of creative way, right? Not to just say that we basically take over the task that the state is neglecting, right? But we use it as a political momentum to actually create ruptures in the border regime, right? We do not want to become service providers for the border regime, right? We do not want to have these sort of tasks outsourced to civil society, which is pumping millions also into the search and rescue community, right? We want to see this as a political moment to enlarge the spaces of resistance that migrants themselves create. So I think we can use these humanitarian narratives, but they have to always be embedded in political language, because the issue is political, right? It's not a natural phenomenon that people die in the Mediterranean Sea. And so even if we use a language of compassion, of humanitarianism, I think it has to be linked to direct political actions and demands for radical political change and transformation. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thanks a lot, Maurice. There was a comment, excellent point. Thank you. I want to finally make a remark, because I feel the gap between, let's say, the situation in the sea, the situation after burning Moria, and what we can do and what we can really create is very big. Of our feeling is mainly in the mobilization for the relocation, that everything is blocked all the time. There is huge mobilizations. There are bigger and bigger networks, but the results really to get something is still very small. So I think this gap, the question how to extend existing corridors, how to extend what Maurice said, the ruptures and created by the migrants, is really a crucial question. To go on and to move between practices and a vision, I think this is something we have to do anyway. And yeah, I hope that in this discussion we raised a lot of interesting questions. I think we will evaluate, and we probably can go on with discussions on several points in the future, what will be very, very important. So I can at least announce that another panel will take place from the Sea to the City initiative at the end of November, with a main focus on, let's say, equal rights in the cities, mainly under the circumstances of the COVID-19 conditions. What does it mean for rights, for health, for living conditions? And I want to mention what I said in the very beginning, that there was a plan to have a bigger Palermo conference already this year in 2020. Now we hope, inshallah, of course, it depends to the pandemic situation, but we hope that perhaps in June next year, 2021, we can really do this bigger conference of the different actors, where we now here represented a certain spectrum, but where we think a lot of practices developed in the last years, what we could not imagine 10 or 15 years ago, and that, yeah, corridors are already an existent practice, and we wish and hope that in this bigger conference probably in June 2021, we can try to bring together again all the actors in a much more wider spectrum, and to continue, yeah, also these important discussions which we try to bring to the stage today. So I say thank you to all the speakers and the listeners, and yeah, hope to see you soon, not only online, but real life, latest next year in Palermo. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.